Like I was saying, if you read some Freudian, I should say, quick reads, like condensed, easy to understand books, a book, what do they call them? Like cheat pages where they condense a whole book into something shorter to understand. Or if you just try to if you actually go to college for psychiatry or psychology, one of the beginning courses is child psychology. And I know this because I was able to take a beginner's course in high school where the teacher just put a bunch of books and talked about it. But it wasn't in depth. In high school, it was just a glimpse, and I can't even remember. I think it was English language arts or something. It wasn't even like the main class. It was just something we were supposed to read over and understand. And I think it's because we had a very hippie teacher in her 70s that really wanted to teach really complex topics, even though she was only an art and English teacher. But anyway, so that did interest my peak in psychiatry and psychology, plus many other things before. And now I realize that a lot of it is people hurting kids and children. There's a lot of psychiatrists out there hurting children. And I think that's wrong. And so I would rather make sure that people can get the help they need without getting hurt. But by reading through some of this paperwork and by reading, it's very normal for our children to experiment sexually with crayons, markers, for boys to stick it in holes, random sockets, and toys. At the age of 4, 3, 5, it's very common. It's called experimentation. It builds neurons in the brain to tell them what that's for, what it's used for, what they like, what they don't like. If they stick their you-know-what in a light socket, they're not going to like that, and they'll realize it doesn't go there. It doesn't go in a light socket. So that's actually very normal behavior for children. Most people forget it. I don't remember most of my experimentation at the age of 5. One of my relatives said when I was like 5 years old and he was 3, I put a metal toy car in his diaper. That's all I really remember. And so stuff like that is actually really common between siblings. But when you take two, like let's say neighbors or something, and they enjoy it, that's the problem. Some boys get a rush off of this. Of course, you're skin and skin. If you give somebody a back rub, it's going to be enjoyable. But if you give a child a back rub at a young age, it's still enjoyable. And it makes neurons in their brain that say this is enjoyable. And if you get them at a young age and you start doing this, or you start observing their behaviors, then you'll realize that this could be a problem if it's done over time. If you have a neighbor that's playing with your child and they're just experimenting in the other room and you don't catch it, that's not a problem. But if it becomes a habit of your child and he builds those neurons in his brain, that's when the homosexuality comes out, because he's now built a whole pathway to pleasure for homosexual gratification. Meanwhile, he's never ever had any female relationship. See, I got lucky because at the age of 7, I had a female relationship up in the mountains of New Mexico. I still remember her name, Christina, one of the most beautiful female relationships I ever had. I was young, we experimented. We're not going to go into that. But that built a pathway for my love and for my enjoyment of spending time with women, girls. And because we experimented a little, it also gave me something that I enjoyed and built a pathway to that. Even at the age of 7, if a girl lifts up her shirt, that's going to be enjoyable to the other 7-year-old. So at that point, that builds a dopamine. That's going to release a little bit of dopamine. And that dopamine, that pleasure feeling, is going to build receptors in your brain that's going to remember that that's pleasurable. But if a child constantly is just doing it with males, it's going to build a pleasure pathway in the brain to males, and they're going to have pleasure with males. And it's that simple, building pathways in the brain. We go to talking about born this way or they became this way. It's very simple. You build your brain up. And if you need to build it a certain way, you can. Now, there's a bunch of stuff in between that, but I gotta go.